Hello everyone. Welcome to the Center for Social Entrepreneurship's Friday Speaker Series. Our speaker today is Pendoley from Thinking Beyond Borders. So Pendoley isn't trying to solve the world's biggest problems, he's trying to prepare others to do it. As founder and CEO of Thinking Beyond Borders, an educational nonprofit offering gap year programs, Robin has led the development of innovative programs that are redefining social impact leadership. Sometimes labeled as a social entrepreneur, he's skeptical of that field and the startup culture he's created in the social sector. Before starting Thinking Beyond Borders, Robin spent 8 years working in Boston and LA public schools as both a teacher and administrator. He served as co-director of the USA Gap Year Fairs and as a board member of the American Gap Association. Robin holds a BA in International Development from UCLA and a Master's of Education from Harvard Graduate School of Education. One more thing before Robin comes, I'm sending the binder around. Just please sign in with your name and email so you can be on our mailing list. And please join me in welcoming Robin today.
Hi. Thanks for coming out on a Friday afternoon. It was really quiet out there on campus, so I'm glad you guys were all able to join. My name is Robin Pendoley. I'm the founder and CEO of Thinking Beyond Borders. So let me start with a couple of things. First of all, let's start with the problem, at least as I see it. I think do-gooders aren't very good at doing good. I really believe that. I also think there's a solution to this, though, which is love and intellect. And I think this is a solution that is passed down to us by some pretty amazing people throughout history. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm also going to share a few assumptions with you before we start, because I'm a big believer in the fact that we should be on the same page about what our assumptions are before we start the conversation. My first assumption is that inequity and injustice are timeless. There has always been inequity and injustice in our world. And I really believe there always will be. And there are a lot of other great thinkers. Martin Luther King talked about it brilliantly. Right? Number 2 is that good skills and good intentions aren't enough. If we want to go out and change the world, there's millions of people every day who walk out of their homes with good intentions and good technical skills. They come home exhausted at the end of the day, having made problems worse rather than better. Good intentions and good technical skills are not enough. Next, meaningful social impact is rare. There are a few names that we all know, and we all know them really well. These are people who've created social impact all around the world, and we're familiar with them because their leadership was so rare. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mandela, Eunice. These are people whose names we know not just because they created big change. We know their names because they created a certain type of change. They created that rare change that actually moved the needle toward equity and justice. I assume that we're overly focused on the tools of social change. Social entrepreneurship is a great example. Social entrepreneurship is a great tool for social change, but it's only a tool. Think about a hammer. You can pick up a hammer and you can build the Sistine Chapel, or you can build the most beautiful piece of architecture that brings communities together and creates a space where incredible things can happen. You can also pick up a hammer and beat someone with it. Social entrepreneurship is the same thing. It's not a question of whether or not you picked up the best version of social entrepreneurship. It's a question of whether or not you know what to do with it once you pick it up. Do you know how to wield it effectively? The last assumption that I'll share at the moment is that I believe that humanizing relationships lead to equity and justice. Humanizing relationships are those moments when, despite all of those barriers that we think about, whether they are political or social or economic or cultural, whatever it may be, we're still able to look someone in the eye and say, yeah, we share 98, 99% of our daily lives. We do almost the exact same things. We wake up, we eat food, we cry at a baby's birth, we mourn when someone passes away, We ask hard questions of ourselves, of our communities. We laugh. All of these things, the vast majority of what our day-to-day looks like is the same, no matter where we're from. And that we start our relationships by recognizing that. Those are my assumptions. I'll talk more about all that along the way. But I thought I'd share a story to start, because I think this will help you understand why, at least I do what I do, and why I think it matters. So when I was 21 years old, I was studying abroad in Bolivia, and I was one evening sitting on a stoop in Potosi. I had just been running through the streets, and Potosi is at 14,000 feet, so you don't run very far without being completely out of breath. And I'm sitting on this stoop, it's just after dark, my head is in my hands, and I'm sobbing. A few days before, I had gone to Bolivia really because I was looking for that group of people that were out to change the world too. People that shared that understanding that I had, at least a visceral understanding of there's something wrong here. I had seen it in the community I'd grown up in. I'd grown up in a very blue-collar community in California. When I was in middle school, we moved to a very wealthy white community only 30 minutes away by car. And it really dawned on me that there was a lot of inequity and there's a lot of injustice, and I wanted to understand it. I'd studied international development in my undergrad, trying to figure out, how did we end up here? Like, how did we end up in this scenario where there's so much inequity and injustice, and most of us either don't see it or don't care enough to fix it? And when I finally found this study abroad program, I was studying abroad with SIT in Bolivia. It was about culture and how it's changed from development. It felt like, okay, anybody that goes to this program, they've got to be part of my tribe, right? That was my thinking. And so I showed up there, and there's 23 of us in our group, and we start off having these amazing conversations about development and what's wrong with it and how it can be different, what we each want to do. For the first few weeks of the program, I thought, this is it. This is my tribe. This is what I've been looking for. I finally don't feel lonely in asking all these hard questions and having this burning feeling that I want to do something, I want to make the world a better place. A few weeks into the program, we go on this trip as a group, and we're taken up to the Altiplano and to Lake Titicaca. Now, in the middle of Lake Titicaca is La Isla del Sol. This was at the height of the Inca Empire. It was believed that this was Mecca. 100 million people living in the Inca Empire at the time of the conquest. The belief was at some point in your life you need to trek across the Andes to this tiny little island. Because in the middle of the island there is a natural spring. And that natural spring was believed to be the source of all life. So you should go there at some point because it's a critical part of your spirituality and being to go to the source of all life. I think we all know the basics of the conquests, right? We know the basics of the history. As many as 100 million people, less than 100 years later, were fewer than 10 million. Disease, war, oppression, genocide. We went out to Isla del Sol in a little boat, we got off the boat, and it was about a half-mile hike up and over the island to get to the Garden of the Inca where this spring is. And there was a woman there who was dressed in a traditional costume with her llamas, trying to sell us a picture for 5 bolivianos, and most of us were going, okay, that feels awkward. And then we got to the Garden of the Inca, and it was beautiful. It's this very arid region, and then all of a sudden you're in this little patch of forest. And there it was. There was this little spring, and it was very small, but knowing the history of it felt important. It felt like an important moment. And so I went off from the group, and I sat down and took out my journal and kind of struggled with the fact that I saw, chip wrappers around as litter and all of that. But okay, this is still an important moment. And a few minutes in, I realized that I'm distracted by the noises I'm hearing. It's a group of my friends in the lake at the bottom of this little hill, at the bottom of this little forested area, swimming and laughing and jumping in the water and having a great time. And I felt like I was in the middle of the square in Mecca watching someone defecate. It just crushed me. I didn't really know how to put words to it, so I kind of struggled with it for 3 days. We kind of kept this trip going. There's 23 of us in this group, so it wasn't really anywhere to hide. I just kind of, hid in my journal and kept writing and trying to figure it out. 3 days later, we were supposed to be putting together presentations as a group in small groups, and I kept trying to push my group to try to explore this concept, and I couldn't get them to understand what I was struggling with. Now, we went into the seminar, and everybody gave their presentations, and at the end, I tried to introduce this concept that I still was struggling to put words to, and everyone looked at me like I had two heads. They didn't get what I was talking about, why it was a big deal. And I felt pretty shut down, and immediately after that, the seminar ended, and I ran out the door of the hotel lobby that we were staying in, and was running through the streets of Pendoley. And there I found myself on that stoop, feeling like the tribe was gone. I'd been seeking some group of people that understood why I was asking these questions and what these questions were, and why they mattered not just to the world, but to me personally, at a core level. And all of a sudden it felt like that was all gone. I felt more alone than I'd ever felt. Not just because I didn't have that group of people, but suddenly it felt as though every assumption I had about what the world was, what was wrong with it, how to fix it, and what my role in all of that could be, was gone. I didn't feel like I had answers to anything anymore. Over the next year, I graduated from college 6 months later. It was the spring of 2000. When I graduated, my mentor at UCLA, who was the head of the Development Studies Department, gave me a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. He knew that I was really interested in education already. I'd been volunteering at a local school and coaching their track and cross-country teams and that kind of thing. In this book, after I graduated, as I was trying to process where I was at, still feeling fairly shaken, but as though I'd started to rebuild in terms of my understanding of myself and the world, I read Paulo's piece in this book about how if we really want to work in solidarity with an oppressed class, we have to die a social death first. Anything other than that is going to be charity, it's going to be problematic. And the way he described a social death led me to this description, which I'll share with you, is that our understanding of ourselves and the world is this interconnected network of assumptions, right? And it's a net. It's all tied together. You can question one and the net's still going to hold. You can question two, the net will hold. But if you start questioning enough of those assumptions, intensively enough, eventually the net breaks. That's what he called the social death. And as I was reading this and I was thinking about that moment on that step in Hope to See, that was what it just made sense to me. It was like, oh, I was grieving. I was grieving my own death. Feels like very dramatic terms to put on it. But at the same time, I also thought about the months that had passed since then and realized that I did feel as though I was being reborn as someone different. One of the biggest differences being I no longer felt like I had answers to anything, but I started to figure out what questions mattered. I started to realize that the person I wanted to be was not someone who walked around and said, teacher, teacher, I got the answer. I realized that I actually felt more comfortable in who I was if I was saying, I have no answers, but I can ask some good questions, and I think we should talk about them and explore them together. I realized that saying that I had all of these answers was trying to limit a privilege that I actually didn't deserve and didn't want. A year after that point of reading that book for the first time was 9/11. And I was living in Eugene, Oregon, and I watched it happen and watched our nation respond to the horror and the atrocity of it, of this sadly very human act, because humans are capable of very terrible things. And I very quickly realized, within 24 hours, I was at the big used bookstore in downtown Eugene and walked out with 2,500 pages of reading, mostly about the life of Martin Luther King. Because at that moment, I realized that I needed heroes. I needed to seek out somebody who was thinking about really meaningful change, fundamental change that would actually move the needle toward equity and justice. I couldn't just say, well, there are all these NGOs out there and they're doing development work and I'll just go join one of those because I'd studied development long enough to know that they were part of the problem some of the time. A lot of the time. Even though they were well-intentioned, even though they had good technical skills. So I started reading. And what I found was that great agents of change throughout history, those names that I mentioned, and then a whole bunch of people that we don't know, are still rare. But we don't know their names because they didn't work at the international level. But that those great agents of change who really moved the needle toward equity and justice shared a specific set of capacities, and they were really good at it. They shared these incredible capacities for love and intellect. I worked in education for about 10 years before, in public schools, primarily urban schools, before I met the other people that I founded Thinking Beyond Borders with. Our mission is to empower and inspire students to address critical global issues. To be more specific, we really think that that's about helping students develop those capacities for love and intellect, and to develop them in a very specific way. Here's our theory of change. If you work in an organization, you should know the theory of change. It doesn't have to stay the same forever. In fact, you should be open to the idea that it might change forever, evolve. This is ours at the moment. We assume history is more or less always going to be the same, has been and will be. There has always been great inequity and injustice. There always will be inequity and injustice. We also assume good skills and good good intentions are also a constant. There have always been people with good intentions and good skills. And yet that hasn't changed the fact that history has always included injustice and inequity. But there are those of us who think a lot about the could be. We aspire to a world that is more equitable, that is more just. Not just the world, but our communities. Sometimes just within our own families, our neighborhoods. Sometimes we are thinking at a national or international scope. Dr. King said to us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He says it does move toward the could be. Our assumption at TBB is that it doesn't bend just because time has passed. Our assumption is that it bends because there are unique individuals, rare individuals, who share those capacities for love and intellect and know how to wield them in a way that bends the arc. At Thinking Beyond Borders, our theory of change is that if we find those people who really want to spend their whole lives committed to creating a more equitable and just world, and we help them develop those capacities at that really critical moment of their life, that they could spend an entire lifetime after that, professional career, personal lives, bending the moral arc of the universe, doing it better than they would have been able to do if they just had good skills and good intentions. Specifically, we broke down those capacities for love and intellect into more specific pieces that fall under those. One is something we call higher order empathy. Higher order empathy, we talk a lot about empathy in education these days, and the empathy we talk about is the easy one. Either A, you see somebody who's hurting and you want to lend a hand. If you're not born with that, there's a diagnosis for you. That's not hard. That's not a hard one for most of us. There's the next level of empathy, which we all seem to be struggling with these days, which is how do we sit across the table from somebody that we don't totally agree with and have a productive conversation? That one's really not all that hard either, but we struggle with it nonetheless. The really hard empathy, the higher order empathy, is one that we have to strive for every day if we want to try to get there. That's the one that Dr. King used when he said in 1963 in Birmingham, you don't have to love the sheriff. Excuse me, you don't have to like the sheriff, but you have to love him. Even though he's turning fire hoses on your children as they protest. Even though he's sending out German shepherds, teeth bared, toward your children as they march peacefully 2 by 2 through the streets. You don't have to like him, but you have to love him. You have to believe in his capacity as a human to still work toward equity and justice at some point in the future, and you have to believe it is partly your responsibility to help create a pathway for him to do that in the future. That's higher order equity. That one's hard. We also believe that under love, developing our capacities for love and intellect is developing our capacity as learners, to be humble but powerful learners, to be people who say, I don't have the answers to everything, but I do have questions. And my ability to explore those questions only improves when I find other people who are willing to explore them with me, humbly and honestly, to ask hard questions, not just of the world, but of ourselves. And that all of that is tied into having a sense of purpose and direction for ourselves that's rooted in a critical engagement with our own assumptions, our own morals, our own beliefs. That's about, in the language of today, that's about exploring our own privilege and the opportunities and potential it gives to us and the limitations that it puts on us as well, as people who want to do good. So what did we do? The colors don't come out quite as nicely. What did we do? We created international education programs that take groups of students and take them to live in other cultures around the world. We create really dynamic learning environments for people who want to do this type of work to come together to do this type of work well. They live in multiple different communities over the course of either 1 or 2 semesters. They live in homestays, so they're embedded in communities, coming to see that their lives are not all that different than the lives of the people that they live with, coming to call strangers mom and dad by the time they leave 5 weeks later, coming to love different food and different experiences of going to the bathroom and showering and realizing that those are not all that different than their own. At the same time, they're also working alongside locals in those communities who have committed themselves to trying to fix the issues that are facing their communities. This is Johnny Reindahl living in Pendoley Bay, South Africa, and working alongside these 2 women who are both caregivers. They work going house to house, meeting with patients who have HIV and AIDS or malaria or tuberculosis, and making sure that they have the basic fundamental care that they need, which is more than just the medication and the food. Sometimes it's the care of someone sitting and holding their hand for 20 minutes and talking to them when they've been ostracized by everyone in their community, including their families. That's a lesson in public health. And then we're also creating a space for students to reflect, for students to dig deep into themselves, and to come together as a group and dig deep into the others out there who've thought about these issues, thinking about how these issues of public health or natural resource management, the environment, or education, how they play out not just in the community we're in, but all around the world. Learn to ask hard questions, not only of the world around us, but of ourselves. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? What are your assumptions? And how do those play out in a dynamic, complex world? This is what our flagship program looks like. It's a 2-semester program. You'll see students are living in 4 different countries over that time. They're in Ecuador looking at natural resource management, the environment. They're in South Africa looking at public health. They're in Thailand looking at sustainable agriculture. They're in India looking at education. They also have a return portion in the United States where they're meeting with policymakers in DC, at the World Bank, the IMF. They're spending a day lobbying their members of Congress on the Hill, getting a chance to hear what global policymakers are thinking, people who are setting the conversation domestically and abroad, and comparing it to what local communities and local leaders were saying about what development is. So this concept of love and intellect is important, and it's complex, but I'll try to give you the basics of what we think about it. One is that love and intellect are risky on their own. It's not just about, I'm going to open my heart up and I'm going to love everyone and everything, or I'm going to love really intensively the people that need the most love. Because when we love in a way that's unbalanced, we run the risk of becoming an advocate. It's not something we usually think of as a bad word, and it isn't necessarily. But if your intense love for one community or for one individual pushes you to a point where you're going to advocate for them and be blind to the other perspectives or indifferent to the other perspectives, we lose our ability to bring people together in a more just and equitable world. We start fighting for one group against the others. We lose the ability to find empathy for others. If we start developing our intellect and focusing so much on our intellectual power in a way that's unbalanced, we run the risk of dehumanizing. It becomes statistics, it becomes policies, it becomes processes or systems. And we lose the ability to connect to real people and real lives. So there's a risk in developing either one of those independently or developing both of them independently of one another. You can be great at loving people and you can be great in your intellect and powerful in your intellect and still not be very good at using them both to create equity and justice. The real trick is to find the balance between the two and to live in the tension between the two, because there's always a tension between love and intellect. Being able to look at statistics and understand how those statistics about infant mortality relate to the mother in front of you, who's worried about mother-to-child transmission of HIV. And the reality of her life is not just about, well, if we just delivered more pills to this community, everything would be okay. Because it just isn't that simple. That mother may choose the risk of giving birth to a baby that might contract HIV from her, rather than taking the pill, which could be a public act that results in her entire family and community ostracizing her and her child. It becomes complex. Being able to balance those two things, our love and our intellect, is what puts us in a position to have humanizing relationships that also have the potential to create a more equitable and just world. So, I'm just about done. But as I finish this part, I'm going to share one more assumption with you, which is that I assume that you came here today because you're somebody who thinks about doing good in the world and wanting to do good in the world. That's my assumption, on some level. So, as somebody who is in that process myself, of trying to do good in the world and wanting to do good in the world, I thought of a few questions that really drive my process every day and continue to be part of my process every day as I think about trying to bend the moral arc of the universe. The first one is always asking myself, what is meaningful impact? Not just assuming that there are these statistics out there that everybody looks at, and if I just drive those statistics up, it's meaningful impact. Impact happens every day, all around us. It's really easy. Impact is really easy. Meaningful impact is really hard. Two is, why this theory of change? Right? Social enterprise is great. It's a great thing. The Center for Social Entrepreneurship is the group that invited me here. It's a great tool. But we should always be asking ourselves, is this the right theory of change? Should these be the tools that I pick up? Which leads to the next one. Could we be doing this a different way? What role should I actually be playing in this? What are my limitations and opportunities? How does my privilege shape those things? Who are your heroes? My heroes mean a ton to me. And they don't mean a ton just because I read a biography 15 years ago in Eugene, Oregon. I go back and I read it all the time. I'm that guy who, if you see me sitting on BART in the Bay Area or on the Metro in DC, and I've got my headphones in, there's a decent chance I'm listening to a speech from Martin Luther King, because that's what I've got in my iTunes. It's going back and having a relationship with your heroes. Some of them are maybe people from history who you go back and reread and think about not only their professional work, but what was their life like in doing that work? What were the challenges they faced personally? And how might those relate to the challenges you're facing personally? Because really doing meaningful work creating really meaningful social impact is a life, it's not a profession. It's asking hard questions of yourself after you leave the office, not just while you're in it. So building meaningful relationships with your heroes and continuing to seek heroes that help to fill the gap of your need of mentorship and reflection. And sometimes they're real people in your lives. My dad is one of those. And the final thing is, where does your faith lie? At lunch today, I was talking to a few of you about how I really think about this question of what is development, what is meaningful social impact. In many ways, it's not just a technical question, it's a spiritual question. It's a great proxy for what's the meaning of life. What are we trying to do here? What does it mean to be fulfilled and be happy? Not just for me, but for everybody. For me, I've done a lot of work to try to figure out where my faith lies. In the things that, when all else is broken, and I'm really not sure where to put my feet next, where are the things that I really feel are solid? What things can I trust? What things can I go back to as fundamental and use those as starting points for my next move? I certainly don't have it all figured out, but it continues to be part of my process, just like all of these other questions. That's what I've got. Sometimes I put a little bit more on Twitter, which you can't really see there. I'm at Robin Pendoley, but and at TDB Gap. That's what I've got. Questions? Yeah. What's your name, first of all?
Katie.
Hi, Kate.
So I guess like I understand that your programs like kind of hone in this like deeper thinking by the individuals who're taking on your trips. But it seems that you're still using these communities that you're putting students in for their like natural, you know what I mean, like their like authentic experience. And so I guess like I'm wondering how you feel like that differs from like volunteer tourism. Because like I feel like that's a big issue. Like if you're talking about do-gooders that are trying that don't really do good, I feel like volunteer tourism is a big culprit of that. So like where do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one we struggle with internally. Amanda is in the back. She's our program manager, one of our staff here in the US. She's nodding along with that question. We talk about it all the time. Are we different? Are we volunteerists? Are we a volunteerist organization? And I think there are some fundamental things, I hope, that make us different, that separate us. My concern with volunteerism, to use some of the language I used earlier, is it's when we as people of privilege, go to live in a community that is not our own, for our own gain, and look only through our own eyes, and create dehumanizing relationships between ourselves and the community that's hosting us. That's when it becomes an extractive industry. I got my volunteer hours in. I dug a hole in the ground and I feel really good about it. And there's some great pictures of me on Instagram with little kids from the community. It's awesome. That's an extractive industry. That's problematic. Right? One of the things that's different about how we work, that we think makes a difference, we hope makes a difference, is that part of it is that we're embedded within the community. Students are living with families. They're living with families for 5 weeks at a time in each of the communities that we're in. They're living in those houses. They're working alongside local experts. They're not working alongside an international aid organization. They're working with people from those communities who are trying to change those communities to solve problems that affect them, their neighbors, and their families. One of the other things that we do that's different is that in those relationships, we are not a volunteer organization and we're not a service organization. This is really hard for even our students to wrap their brains around. A lot of times they're 3/4 of the way through the program before they're like, we're not here to do service. No matter how many times we say it before that. Because we're of this opinion that of course we're going to go and do good. Of course we have the capacity to do good. They don't have a well. If somebody just came and dug a well, then they'd have a well. Rather than questioning the assumption of, if it was as easy as digging a well, why wouldn't they have done it before themselves? Right? So our partnerships are built by approaching local organizations and saying, look, we're bringing a group of 18-year-old students who are not coming as volunteers, and they probably won't hold any real capacity within your organization. It's not what we do. We don't want to pretend that's what we do. What we are going to do is we're going to bring 18 students who really want to learn from you as experts, right? That want to come and hear from you as local experts who define what the problem is in your community, who are working to define what the solution should be. And they're going to live in their homestay families that same way. They're here to learn from you. And so in that way, we're really working to build humanizing relationships that really say, instead of we're here with arrogance and belief that we can fix your problems and get great pics for Instagram at the same time, we're flipping that on its head and saying, actually, we come humbly as guests in your home and to learn from the work that you do. And for our partner organizations, we compensate them for providing educational opportunities to the students. That's what those partnerships are based on. And as a result, we don't compensate them all that much, but we compensate them enough that it covers the staff costs for them. And our partners, generally speaking, have really been engaged and said, we really believe in what you are trying to do. So our partner in South Africa, for example, the women that you saw in the picture previously with Johnny are home-based caregivers who are from the local townships. They have less than an 8th grade education generally, and they are rarely treated as professionals in their own township, in their own community. Even though they're going door to door and they're wearing their proper uniform and doing professional work, they're rarely treated as professionals. One of the things that after 7 years of partnership with that organization is that the executive director of the organization says that probably the greatest outcome of our partnership is that the caregivers are treated as professionals by our students. They're asked questions, they're treated as experts in their own home community where they rarely are treated as experts. So all of that is to say, I think the volunteerism question is a really important one because the student travel industry, the volunteer industry runs really serious risks of being extractive and exploitative. I don't know for sure that we aren't doing that. I think we aren't doing that. We try really hard to not do that. And we continue to ask ourselves really hard questions about it. But I share all that to say we're thinking really hard about it, and I think we're doing some things that are different, that have resulting in different outcomes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm just gonna how do you go about choosing the communities you would send these students to, why these communities?
Why these communities? So part of it starts with, obviously we have a fundamental responsibility to the safety of our students and staff. So we pick countries and we pick areas of those countries that are stable near and hopefully in the long term. Beyond that, we really cast a wide net through our network and then simply looking at who else is in the region and start talking to folks and say, look, this is what we're trying to do in very clear and basic language. Here's the really great things that we do. Here are the challenges in what we do. And we're looking for other folks to share that vision and want to be part of that with us. And we just keep talking to people. And eventually we meet somebody where they say, oh, that sounds really cool. We want to be part of that. And we think that we have a set of things that we need to make that successful, to host students successfully and create a good learning environment. And we have a set of things that we're worried about to make sure, built on Kate's question, to make sure that it's going to be a productive and healthy relationship. And then we ask them to provide the same thing, and we all sit down and figure out whether or not there's a fit. But a lot of it is you honestly and humbly look for a fit, and you give it the time and space it needs to make sure it's a good fit rather than just trying to force things together. One of the great things for TVB in many ways is that we did not grow very fast and we're still fairly small. It's great only in the sense that it's given us a lot of time to work on these things and make sure it's right. And so we haven't been out there like, oh, we need a new community, we need new, when you start growing really quickly, which a lot of this industry grows very quickly, a lot of people are out there simply scrambling to find as many community partners as they can. We haven't had to do that, which is in many ways a real blessing because we sleep well at night, because we know we have great partners and good relationships with this community. Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges in taking your passion and your idea for this and transforming it into a functioning program?
Yeah. That's a really good question. When we first started talking to people about this concept, what we heard over and over again from experts in the student travel field and education field was, wow, that's really ambitious. And they meant one of two things depending on their tone. It was either, wow, go get it, that's awesome. Or they meant, this is going to explode and it's going to be ugly. And you guys don't know what you're doing. And it was probably a little bit of both for us. We didn't really know what we were doing. I think for me personally, one of the biggest challenges was jumping off the cliff, leaving my job, going to start a new organization that had no money, and we weren't entirely sure whether it was going to work because it was so ambitious. That was a big personal challenge for me initially. And I think to some degree for there were 3 founders originally, and I think that was true for that as well. Beyond that, it's simply been, we've just had to learn every day. One of our founders is from the student travel industry, so he had the business background, the operational background. Another founder is from the service learning sector, so she had that background. My background was in education and international development. So we had a lot of bases, the basic bases covered, but there was a lot to learn. We had no idea how to fundraise, and part of that drove us to say, well, we're not really going to be dependent upon fundraising. We built our nonprofit like a private school. Students pay tuition, and that funds the vast majority of the organization, which means if we're doing something that's valuable to people, we will survive. If we're doing something that is not valuable, we will not survive at a fundamental level, which is something, in some ways, is a really good thing, as scary as it is for those of us who work there. But that's a really good thing. So learning about all of those processes, I've done almost everything you can do with thinking beyond borders. I was one of our first program leaders. I directed the development of our curriculum, so kind of have my hands in that. I worked directing our programs for a little while and still have a little bit of hand in supporting the program director and program manager. I've done the marketing. I'm running a national marketing campaign. I've learned how to build websites and how to do SEO, and I'm learning how to read financial reports better and all kinds of things. And I just have to, I think the biggest thing, maybe not articulate. I think maybe the biggest challenge has simply been being humble enough to say, yeah, okay, I don't know how to do any of this. We just have to keep learning, and we have to be open to learning every day. I'm 10 years into this project, and I learn something new every day. Yeah.
So are you already targeting students in the U.S. or other countries as well?
No, our students are primarily U.S. students from the gap year market. We have slowly started to bring in more students from abroad as well. So we've had students from Mexico, Latvia, Germany, Brazil, a variety of different countries. But it's primarily U.S. students. And to be honest, because of the cost of the program and because it's in addition to the cost of college, it's primarily students of privilege.
Who can afford the program.
It.
Yeah, because the question was that these students are either on the ground for a semester or 2. And then how do you ensure there's a long-lasting impact on both sides? You would give a very authentic exposure to American students here, but then what is the long-lasting impact on the ground on these communities when these students leave?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Let me say one other thing, and then I'm going to answer those, just because I brought up the issue of privilege and students. So privilege in the gap year market is a really big deal at the moment. It's a relatively small thing in the U.S. Very few students take gap years. Maybe 2% of high school seniors this year will take a gap year next year. So it's still a relatively rare thing. And programs tend to be fairly expensive. Even taking time off from school is expensive because you're not progressing towards your degree and then getting out in the professional world where you can earn more money. Pure economics, it's expensive to take a gap year. And that's a problem because anybody can benefit from a gap year. A Middlebury student was with us this past summer as an intern with some law, and he was doing research into how first-generation college students could benefit from gap years and why it is that they're often discouraged from taking them. He did great research on it. You can read his blog series on our blog, on our website. So privilege is a real issue. We've managed to offer a lot of scholarship money over the years, nowhere near as much as there is demand, but we offered $300,000 in scholarship last year, which was about a quarter of our class received scholarship last year, which is pretty good. So that's, setting that aside, I just wanted to point out, that's a real problem, and we haven't figured out how to fix it, and honestly, I don't think anybody in the Gap world has figured out how to fix it. To answer the question about impact, so we definitely measure the impact on our students, and I can talk more about that if you'd like. I think your question was more about impact on the communities. So part of our goal is, I think one of the important things to note is that our goal is not to go and fix communities, right? Our goal is to go and actually learn from communities about their experience and their culture and their work and the work they're doing to try to fix issues that they think are important within their community. So unlike other youth travel organizations where they say, well, we planted 40,000 trees last year, and we built this many latrines and all of that, we actually don't even bother with those kind of statistics. We do meaningful hands-on work. We've probably planted, I don't know, probably upwards of 25,000 trees in Ecuador in the last 4 years in an area that used to be rainforests, and they were strategically done with agronomists on the ground, and that's great. We think that's really valuable. But at the end of the day, what we're hoping to do is to have a positive impact in terms of the relationships that we have with homestay families and the organizations that host us, the organizations that are doing development work on the ground. A lot of that is done simply through constant communication with the original people that we built the partnerships with. And really talking about how those homestay families felt about having those organizations do evaluations. We're evaluating our relationship with our partner organization, making sure that what they're telling us about the homestay experience is the same as what the homestay families are telling us and the students are reporting and all of that. So some of it is very systematic, some of it is trying to keep our ear to the ground about what's happening in all of those different relationships. The final thing I'd say about it is that we don't build any of those relationships based on any significant amount of money exchange. We're covering costs for homestay families to host a student, but we don't pay at the level, we set the level of how much homestay families are compensated, mostly by following our partners, the development organization, not even a volunteer organization, the development organization, following their lead about what proper compensation for the cost of hosting a student look like on a day-to-day basis. We follow their lead in that compensation. And in terms of compensating the organization for the educational opportunity to provide, it's a decent amount of money, between $2,000 to $3,000 for 5 weeks of exposure and opportunity and collaboration to make sure there are hands-on learning opportunities. But it's not enough money for any of the communities we work in for that to be a real driver in those partnerships. The real driver is we all share the same mission and keep making sure that we're working toward that same mission. Yeah.
How many students you said each year now, and how many students total you said since started?
Yeah, so we have 164 alumni, which I'm very excited about. 7 years of programs. We've been fairly small. If you do the math, that's not all that many per year. This past year, we had 34 students graduate from our 2-semester program. There's 2 different cohorts. We had 20 students graduate from our 2 one-semester programs this past fall. So this was a big year for us, and we continue to grow fairly significantly right now. We don't have any grand visions of being huge. That's not our goal. Our goal is to be transformative in the lives of each of the students that come through the program so that they can go off and be transformative in their communities and their work for the rest of their careers and lives. That's really our goal. We can definitely be bigger. We have ideas of ways to be bigger and do that productively, but we're not one of those organizations that believes in scale. We believe in scope and impact more than scale or impact. Does that make sense? Yes?
Have you figured out how to assess the value from your alumni? I mean, have you been able to talk to them about, after a few years, how they look back on those experiences and how they may have affected or informed their work in school?
Yeah, so impact assessment in education is fraught with problems to the point where it's darn near.
I was hoping you had the magical answer.
Yeah,
Because we're all struggling with that, but come
Yeah.
on, just tell us, give us the
there aren't
answer.
magical answers, there are only questions. So we actually we did conduct our own impact assessment a year and a half ago. One of our staff, one of our administrative staff actually did our bookkeeping and helped really run the core of the organization, was getting a master's in international ed at NYU. She helped build an assessment tool to help us measure around 19 different learning outcomes. And she pulled a lot of these outcomes from some of the best tools that are out there in terms of measuring impact in international ed and social change education. And then we added a few of our own that kind of, or at least tweaked some to better align with what it was we were trying to measure. And what we did was we found 22 students who had blogged significantly over the course of the program. They were unrequired blogs, they were unprompted blogs. This is just what they chose to write home about. And we looked at those 19 different indicators, and then she coded for all 19 different indicators across the entire blog series for each of those 22 students. And that allowed us to look at the change for each student along each of those 19 different indicators, and to show aggregate data for all of the students in that year, across all the years, whatever it may be. So over the first 5 years of our program, what we found was that in this one of our 3 general categories, the first was purpose and direction. And there were 3 indicators that we felt fell under purpose and direction. One being identity as an agent of change, doing actionable planning for change, thinking about what am I going to do next, what steps do I want to take, and then creating new initiatives and engaging existing structures. So getting to campus and deciding I'm going to be part of the sustainable agriculture club on campus or whatever it may be. And what we found was that over the course of the program, this being where students entered the program and then where they exited the program, we saw huge growth in the ways that they were talking about and thinking about these things. And it wasn't just the volume, it was the complexity of the ways that they talked about each of those different ideas. Second group, higher order empathy. You can see the different indicators we were measuring for, and again, you can see the growth from that. And the final one was humble but powerful learners. And you can see the areas of growth we were measuring there. If you'd like to see more of this, you can find it all on our website under the About page or the About tab. There's a link to our impact assessment, and we co-wrote a 5-part blog series that is much more accessible than the academic reading. It's not perfect. It's definitely not a perfect tool. It needs some tweaking, and we're excited to go back and give it another run, particularly now that we have more students. But it does show change over the course of the program. Now, in terms of our alumni, we had an alumni event in Boston last night. We had 34 of our alumni, of our 164 alumni were at our graduation 2 weeks ago in DC to celebrate the 34 who are graduating. So they've continued to stay really closely engaged with us. And I have lots of great stories. I don't know that I have any measurement, but I have lots of great stories that demonstrate that they're thinking really differently about how to create change. Alexandra Duncan was there in Boston last night. She was part of our first class, one of the students I traveled with as a program leader. She graduated she was at Tufts, eventually graduated from NYU, and while she was there, she became a doula. She started working in reproductive health. As an undergraduate, was teaching courses in how to do pelvic exams and gynecological exams to med students at NYU, at Yale, at Rutgers. And when she left college, she realized none of these colleges were running these programs very well to provide this particular type of education. She has this year started a company and is providing those services through contract with Yale, Quinnipiac, I believe Rutgers, I believe NYU as well, to their med schools. She's 24. And they're doing all kinds of incredible work around. It's not just about the physical process of the exam. It's the question of how do you do this in a post-trauma environment? How do you do this across cultures? How do you do this in an international setting? And that she has worked for years to develop that experience both through formal education and in the field to build that. And she's asking great questions about how do I leverage this company into an ability to create really meaningful impact and send more practitioners in the field who are going to understand reproductive health administered in a way that is getting to the core of the problem, not just the physical immediate physical need. So that's an example of somebody who's thinking about it.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. So 1:30 now. But if anyone has the last question.
Sure.
It might be kind of hard. So you mentioned the privilege problem, and how, in one way, I think it's kind of common to try to address that is to raise money for scholarships so that you can have a diverse background. And I was wondering, you also mentioned you don't provide statistics on your impact to people, and I wonder if that would make it easier for you to raise money, and whether or not you think that is endemic of a problem in how other relationships work, and if possible to give any ideas for how to put a higher level of units than most of the area is a different way to do that.
Yeah. A lot of questions in there.
Yeah.
No, I think they're the questions I feel like I'm asking all the time. So this question of privilege runs not only through how do we develop a more accessible program for students from all backgrounds, but also, how do we manage the political and economic and cultural relationships with people that might provide funding to do that. So how do I do this without ranting? So I think the first thing is this, is that I spent the first 8 years of my career in education working in urban schools. So the idea of access to high quality educational opportunities is something that is fundamental in my professional career still. And when we founded Thinking Beyond Borders and started running our programs, many of the educators that I've worked with, or that were in that network, were really dismissive of what we were doing. And in fact, offended by what we were doing. That we were making injustices in the world greater because we were creating programs that only students of privilege would access. I get that. It was really hard to hear people say that, but I get it. At the same time, I think what I've come to is that you can't be everything to everybody, right? We could create programs that are accessible to everybody. There are people out there doing that offer 10-day, 2-week, 3-week programs for students from urban environments during the summer in Guatemala or the Dominican Republic or something like that. You can do that, but they're not this. They don't do this, right? It's not transformative in the same way. It's transformative in a different way. But I can't do that and do this. Those are two different things. And so I think that the reality that I've had to face for myself is I can either feel the pull to want to work with that particular community of students and serve those students, or I can serve this mission. I think one thing that a lot of people on the outside who are asking those questions of us don't understand, our mission is not to serve our students. My goal is not to offer transformative experiences for kids of privilege. That's not our goal. It's the way we get to creating transformative social change. It's the pathway. It doesn't have to be students of privilege. And we're really working to create diversity within our student body. We're doing a lot of things to fundraise. We're doing a lot of things to change our business model and expand it in new and exciting ways that will really open the doors of accessibility to the program. But it was not our primary goal. And I had to accept that as a founder and now as the CEO, is I can't do this mission and make that my primary mission at the same time. I have to remember my specific mission and then figure out how to create more access. That's the approach we decided to take. And it's really hard. Personally, it's really hard for me because there are definitely times when I feel like I'm abandoning a community or a set of communities that I felt very close to in a deep relationship with for a long time. So that's the first part. In terms of changing how funders look at our work, I'm not the world's greatest fundraiser. Primarily because my belief is I'm going to tell you what we're trying to do. I'm going to show you what we're actually doing. I'm going to tell you where the challenges are. And then my belief is if that's something you want to fund, great, let's partner together and bring this to more people. I don't like what is oftentimes the game in funding, which is I'm going to figure out what it is you want to hear, so that you give me more money. Or I'm going to change what it is that we do, so that you'll fund what we're trying to do and I can pay everybody's salary. One of the great things about never having gotten significant amounts of foundation money, other than from families that have been supportive, is that we've never had to compromise our mission. The number one question we always ask is, how do we do better at getting to our mission to empower and inspire students to address critical global issues? Not, what do we do to fit into that grant, to that quest for proposal? And that's a real blessing, but also it's caused a lot of heartache for us personally as everybody's underpaid. And we're getting better. We're a lot better paid now than we used to be. We're still not quite at market rate. And we haven't had the capital to make the kind of investments that we wanted to grow as quickly as I think we're ready to as an institution. You gotta figure out where your best pathway is to serving the mission. That's my belief. And we're working on it. One day at a time.
Knowing your limitations and opportunities.
Yeah, and embracing the limitations. That for me is another way of saying I think earlier, feeling people that I really respected as educators, really not only saying, yeah, it's not something I want to do, to really saying, no, you shouldn't do this. This is a bad thing. That was really hard. That was really hard. I think a lot of them have turned around, and I found other communities of people that have said, no, I really get this. This is important. And some of them are from communities of educators that have been very committed to urban education. They understand social justice is not just about one way of looking at this. Social justice and equity issues need to be dealt with in a systemic way, and we're going to figure out how to make a program that's going to be transformative in that realm, and then we're going to build access to that program. Does that make sense? Yeah. Thank you guys again for having me.
Thank you.